Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
How can you be the freest country in the world when you lock more of your own people in cages than any other country in the world? The lesson of 9/11 should have been to never fund another young rebel group in this part of the world again. America started as the smallest government in history, and it's become the biggest government in world history. At the end of the day, it's all about freedom.
Here's your host, Dave Smith.
Oh, yeah. We are live as we pre-record this episode. But we are alive. For us, it's live. We are pre-recording because we got to, me and Robbie the Fire, got to head over to the Soho Forum in a little bit to go watch one more riveting debate in this wonderful debate series, the Soho Forum. You guys got to come out to one, by the way, if you haven't already. They're so much fun. I know you guys see them online and stuff, but if you're in the New York area, you got to come out. Go over to thesohoforum.org for all the information. Anyway.
Yeah, and they put out like a good spread, so if you're like me, you can really just mooch up like a week's worth of food.
Oh, yeah.
Just
Rob
that sandwich table.
He stores it in his cheeks like a chipmunk. And he's good for the month.
Yeah, I rage out. Other people, they behave, they sit down, they watch the lectures. I'm just in the back shoveling.
Rob's like, they have like a nice line, and it's like Rob comes up and makes a plate, and then like Rob with like a mustache comes up and makes like another plate, and it just more and more people. You do a voice every time, like, oh, hello. I heard the sprood was excellent.
Yes, yeah. Come eat some turkey sandwiches with me.
Jean's wife, like, I think like puts all the food together, and it's really good. You always have good food. You got some good beers. It's like a beer and wine bar. You hang out. You have some
and they're free
drinks.
if you just harass Gene. Isn't that the way it works?
Well, you have to say Tom
You got to tell him
Woods.
socialism is good. Just get him riled up.
That's right. Socialism is good. He'll take away the drink you have. But if you say Tom Woods, he will give you a free drink. And no, if you're like me and you're thinking, what if I say Tom Woods 8 times? There is a 1 drink maximum per person.
Unless you get those
tried
mustaches.
Very hard. Huh?
I said unless you get those mustaches.
Oh, you get those mustaches out, you might be getting yourself a few free time. If you're very unmemorable, perhaps you could work more than one out of Gene. But I don't know. Gene is
he's got an eye.
He's a little chosen, if you know what I mean. He probably isn't going to be buying too many extra beers. But Gene actually completely breaks the stereotype of the Jew. He's one of the most generous people I know. Gene's always like taking care of everybody. So anyway, he's a great guy, and the series is really great. I'm looking forward to this one today. So we came in to pre-record our episode, so you guys would still get an episode from us today. Because how could I not put out an episode this week with everything that's been going on? So 2018 is almost over, and I guess now, as we begin to look back at it, it can be dubbed officially the year of the war criminal funerals, right? Like just the over fucking like over celebrated huge, this has to last 5 days, take up all of cable news. Everybody's got to talk about what a great hero all these people who in any just system would have been spending their life in prison are. And obviously we're talking about George H.W. Bush, and it is. I know I made this point with the McCain stuff. There'll probably be a few things that are like similar thoughts on this one, but I'll make this a little bit more specific to George H.W. Bush because he really does deserve his own time. Let's just say. So I've always said this since I've been doing Part of the Problem, which has been years now. We're coming up on our 400th episode. There are, in this whole dynamic where you have like MSNBC on one side and Fox News on the other side, or whatever it is, New York Times, Washington Post, or something like that. You have like, the left versus the right in America, Democrats versus Republicans. They're all wrong about 90% of the time. But if you want to know where the really, really terrible shit is, what you need to object to the most is when MSNBC and Fox News agree on something. When they come together to agree on something, that's when the most fucked up thing is happening. Like you can bank on that. It really is amazing how, despite, because it's all like professional wrestling. all of politics, all the shit we see is just political theater. It's all a bunch of nonsense. None of it's ever really, or 99% of it is. Like, there's almost nothing of substance. And everybody plays their part. And they have this illusion, much like in professional wrestling, there's like this illusion that we hate each other, we're enemies. But really, after the match, they're grabbing a beer together, everybody's kind of friends, and it's all, and so the idea is, right, that they hate each other. MSNBC and Fox News, these guys are just diametrically opposed. Yet, when George H.W. Bush dies, it's the exact same reaction from both of them. There's nothing controversial about this guy. It's not even the hatred that MSNBC would have had for him while he was president. That's all gone. He's a great guy, and we all come together, and it's the exact same thing. Like, we really just we're really like, he's such a great guy. He was such a great human being. He had a great legacy of public service. We're all together on this. I remember when Obama was president, and they used to talk about how there were these like how divided the Congress was at that time, how divided they were when it was like Boehner in the House and Obama was the president. It was like, oh, they're so divided and they just can't get anything done. Like, they can't come together. Remember, Obama used to rail against them. They're just obstructionists and they can't come together. And then it would be like, oh, the National Defense Authorization Act is up, and everyone just comes together, signs it. Oh, the Patriot Act has to get extended. Everyone comes together, signs it. As soon as there's something about the military-industrial complex, it's like, oh, we're all on the same team all of a sudden. Even with Donald Trump, I mean, it's like, how, if he wants to make like $100 billion weapons sale to the Saudis, there's no controversy about this. It gets done. Believe me, that shit, now that the Democrats have taken over the House again, watch what happens when there's any bill that's vital to the interest of the military-industrial complex. It'll all get passed. As much as Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump are these huge enemies and there are others, believe me, when shit needs to get done for the right reasons, they all come together. And what they all come together on are the worst policies. The worst. Like, okay, Obamacare couldn't get any, Republican votes or something like that. But when he wanted to write into law that we can detain American citizens without charging them, that got a lot of Republican support. Plenty there. The war in Iraq was bipartisan. The war in Afghanistan was bipartisan. The $1 trillion military budget is bipartisan. All the shit that's the worst shit the government does is bipartisan. And, of course, the praise for John McCain and now the praise for George H.W. Bush. All the same. It's all, it's all in the same world of, well, you can't step outside these bounds. And I guess you could say that part of it is, like, well, when someone dies, right, you're supposed to say nice things about them, which doesn't really make any sense. Doesn't really make any sense at all. I mean, if somebody's dead, either they're being judged in some afterlife.
Also, if you're going to celebrate pieces of shit, you're going to get more pieces of shit.
Well, right, absolutely. But I'm just saying, like, there's even the idea of someone just died, so we should be nice. Now is not the time to criticize them.
Fuck
well, it's
that.
like, yeah, fuck it, because
you're going to incentivize other people. Like,
that's a
say
point.
Nice things when I die.
Absolutely. If you have a horrific legacy, then celebrating them would, right, as you say, would kind of like be, giving a pass to other people who have horrific legacies. And also, it's like, what's the actual justification here? It's like, that person's dead. They don't need to hear nice things said about them. And then I guess you would go like, well, it's for like the family who's mourning them. But if you want me to watch my words for the fucking Bush family, sorry, that's not going to happen. Like, what, his family of war criminals might be offended if I call him a war criminal? That is the least of my concerns.
We don't really want to question if this whole thing's a good idea. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. Praising
That's
him
exactly
is praising
right.
the system.
That's exactly right. And the other thing that they do, right, is and I've heard this a bunch, like a few different people on Fox News and MSNBC. And again, it's crazy to see how they have the exact same talking point. But they'll say things kind of like, look, you may have your political differences with George H.W. Bush, but what you can't question is how great a guy he was. Like, that's just beyond, you can't even get into that, because that would just be crazy. So let's start with the premise that he's a really awesome guy. Like, imagine that about any other evil leader. You know, imagine if you said that about Stalin or Hitler or someone like that. And you said, you know, listen, you could agree or disagree with Hitler rounding up the Jews, but don't question whether he was a good guy or not. That's kind of like beyond the pale. You're like, no, that is the question at hand, is whether he was a good guy or not. These things are not removed. That's the idea of like statism, right? It's like, oh, that's not violence. That's the state doing violence. So that's a separate thing, but it's not. And I'll tell you,
well, part of that is it looks like they're trying to almost turn it into Trump criticism of, remember what a real diplomatic guy looked like who made us look good. And
forget almost. I mean, that's the angle. It was the same thing with McCain. It's the same thing as him. It's just like they're using it to serve their own political interests. And those are, I mean, you just nailed the two. Exactly. Number one, you can't question the whole system. You know, you could disagree with policy X or policy Y, even if policy X might have been starting a war. You know what I mean? That you don't like. It's like, okay, maybe we shouldn't have started that war. That's a fair debate. But you couldn't get into like, you're a horrible person for starting a war that we shouldn't have started. Because I mean, that's just a policy, right? Like that was just pushing buttons and ordering other men around. And again, it's like, okay, if you want to go down that road, then basically nothing you do through the state can be judged morally. The problem is, of course, we only give that excuse to our state, the United States of America. Nobody gives that to any of the, European totalitarian states or to any other government. No other government gets that pass. Like it's just, well, that was a policy. And in fact, we explicitly at the Nuremberg trials told high-level Nazis like, no, that excuse doesn't fly. We were just following orders. Like, no, fuck you. You were just following orders. You were murdering people. No one cares if it was, who cares? Why is that any different than if I told you to go kill somebody? By the way, if I do, you have to do it if you want to be on this podcast. That's part of the deal.
Who taking down, Davy Smith?
The state.
All right.
Go get him.
But we're not really threatening you. I'm not coming.
Haha, this is all satire, of course. Everything we say on this podcast. Oh, yeah, a bunch of jokes. Come on, guys.
Yeah.
Chill out, guy.
And if you're coming for me, just let me enjoy the sandwiches tonight first.
Yeah, really. Now, the other thing I would say to all people who are like, oh, you shouldn't speak ill of the dead or whatever, that old stupid fucking thing your grandmother used to say, which is just like, I hate it's like the retarded like slogans of the 1920s or something like that. Where I remember one time one of the clucking hens on The View said to Ann Coulter when she was on, they actually said this to Ann Coulter when she was talking about immigration policy. They go, my grandmother told me, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And it got a big round of applause from the audience. And it's like, I don't even know what to say to that other than, ma'am, your grandmother was a retard, and we're grown-up people having a conversation here. Sometimes that requires not saying nice things. And you're just like, we should abolish slavery. I'm like, hey. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And you're like, no, actually, I'm going to keep saying this. So, it's like this idea that we shouldn't speak ill of the dead. So who does that apply to? Like, I'll tell you, there is no way, and I know I mentioned this on the John McCain podcast, and Tom Woods was the one who first said this, and I give him the credit for it, but it is a point worth repeating. But when Ron Paul dies, he's not going to get any of this. Like, oh, you can't say anything bad about, oh, he has to be praised constantly. I know Ron Paul's never going to die, but I'm just saying, if Ron Paul were to die, they would never give him this, because Ron Paul is, he was against every war. So you can't support the guy who was against every war. The guy who was for every war, that guy we can just endlessly praise. And I wonder, would you say, if, say, after Adolf Hitler died, or after Joseph Stalin died, or after Mao Zedong died, or Pol Pot, or after Fidel Castro died, or any of these just like horrific, murderous leaders, after they died, would you say like, hey man, don't speak ill of the dead. Let's just talk about what was nice about those guys? Like, I don't think so. And I think if you say that, you're out of your mind. Because that's not appropriate. It's like a really, really bad person died. And the appropriate thing, if we're going to talk about them, is to talk about how terrible they were and how awful their legacy was. And yes, I put George H.W. Bush in on that level of evil. This was a very, very bad person. There are so many dead people because of that guy. So many people whose lives have been ruined. And, it's like, if you listen to the mainstream media about it, it's like the criticism you would get is like, well, he said, read my lips, no new taxes, but then he ended up raising taxes. So, there's some things you can criticize, right? Because he did raise taxes when he said he wasn't going to raise taxes. And it's like, yeah, that was the least of what this monster did. The absolute least. So, the other thing I wanted to mention, by the way, just in this spirit of things, is that when Murray Rothbard died in like 94 or something like that, William F. Buckley, who I'll talk about a little bit more in this podcast, William F. Buckley, who was like the face of the conservative movement, George H.W. Bush's boy, William F. Buckley, wrote a scathing review of Murray Rothbard. Like, scathing. Those rules don't apply when any of the good guys die. Like, they just get, like, shit on. There's no... So in that spirit, let's, let's give a nice review of George H.W. Bush with the same William F. Buckley gloves off approach. Okay. So George H.W. Bush was a CIA guy. He was the head of the CIA. There's suspicions that he was in the CIA a lot longer than he acknowledges. Of course, he came from a fairly corrupt father. His father, George H.W. Bush's father, so George W. Bush's grandfather, was a known Nazi sympathizer, not exactly a believer in individual liberty and freedom. It was a real corrupt guy. They were this real established family, a lot of shady business ties, and it's rumored and thought that he was in the CIA a lot longer than he publicly acknowledges. But regardless of that, he was the head of the CIA. Then he was vice president under Ronald Reagan, and then he was the president for 4 years, from 1988 to 1992. So, just to give some context, even talking about William F. Buckley, who was also a CIA guy, by the way. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
It's interesting to note with him because you might just think, hey, he was only the president for 4 years. That guy left a long imprint in government with, CIA vice president, and also he's like the Kissinger warmongering wing of government. Like
that's right.
That's the same camp. It's like those group of people who are just, hey, where can we go and who can we kill?
Yes, that's exactly right. And he was the guy. So you have this dynamic, and Murray Rothbard wrote a lot about this, but basically the Republican Party, or the right wing in America, was, if you look at pre-World War II, and even into the 50s, the conservative wing of the Republican Party always advocated for a non-interventionist foreign policy. I mean, this went back to the founders, right? Like George Washington's farewell address. He said, right, like it was stay out of entangling alliances, have peace with nations, trade with people, be friends with them. Don't get bogged down in these wars. This is exactly what you don't. This is what we escaped in Europe. This is why we're not, who cares about these monarchies and all this other stuff? Like, that's not what we're a part of. And it was the conservative wing of the Republican Party who was very much opposed to us getting involved in World War I and World War II. Of course, now that's what the McCain wing of the war hawk Republicans now will blast them for that. It's like, see, you didn't want to do anything about Hitler, or you didn't want, but regardless of how you feel about that, they that was a very non-interventionist wing. And what William F. Buckley and National Review, again, William F. Buckley, also CIA ties, what these guys were able to do was transform the conservative wing of the Republican Party from a non-interventionist wing into the anti-communist, as they were known in my childhood, the Cold Warriors. So the people who were basically like, we got to go get communism wherever it is. It's like, if we got to go fight a war in fucking Vietnam and hundreds of thousands of innocent people got to die so that we make sure that the red team doesn't take over, the blue team takes over Vietnam. Because, like, who the fuck cares what political system Vietnam has to organize them? We got to do that to fight off this red menace, okay? And just to understand where William F. Buckley is coming from, because I have this up. If you want to go read this full article, it's really fascinating, and it's truly evil. And this is from William F. Buckley. The name of the article is "The Party in the Deep Blue Sea," and I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's like a 2,000-word piece. But what's really interesting about it is that Buckley basically breaks down the libertarian point of view and then argues why he can't be for it. So he starts off in the article by basically acknowledging that the greatest enemy of mankind is the state, and that statism is the great evil. It's literally the subtitle of the article. The article is called "The Party and the Deep Blue Sea." And the subtitle of the article is, "Ideally, the Republican platform should acknowledge a domestic enemy, the state." So right away, if you read that, you're almost like, oh, wow, he's one of us, like, okay, he gets it. He completely gets, he quotes Albert J. Nock and quotes that the state is of and begotten by aggression and like all these great individualist quotes, totally nails it. There's also a great article, if you want to read, by Murray Rothbard called Buckley Revealed, where he critiques this article and kind of goes over it. But so I'm going to read from Murray Rothbard, his critique of the article. This is Rothbard. The brief article begins splendidly with the affirmation that our enemy is the state and excellent quotations from such great individualists as Albert J. Nock, Herbert Spencer, and H.L. Mencken. Buckley declares that the great issue of our time is freedom versus statism, and sides with Spencer that the state is, quote, this is what I say, begotten of aggression and by aggression. He goes on to castigate the Republican Party for offering no real alternative to the statist power drive. So this is how the article starts. However, then he basically then his conclusion in the article is like, okay, so this is what we all agree in theory. The state is evil, freedom is good. This is the great struggle of man, freedom versus tyranny. The state is about tyranny. However, this is all out the window. This is a mere thought experiment for one reason and one reason only. And that's because there is the Red Menace. There's the commies. There is this Soviet Union, and they're hell-bent on world domination. So they believe in totalitarian statism, which is our enemy, and they're coming to take us all over. So this is a nice idea that that we want to fight, or that we want to fight the state. But really, if the commies are our enemy, then we got to be ready to fight the enemy. And how can we do that? How can we fight off the commies? Well, there's only one way, with a state military. So we need to embrace statism, because that's the only way to fight them off. Now, Murray Rothbard just tears this down brilliantly, because he's like, okay, so basically your fear is the state, and the state coming and taking us over. So why don't we just create that right here to avoid that happening? It's like, this guy's trying to shoot me in the head, so I'm going to shoot myself in the head before he can do it. That way he'll never do it. Like, okay, but you kind of end up in the same place. Buckley actually writes, thus far, invincible aggressiveness of the Soviet Union imminently threatens U.S. security. We have got to accept big government for the duration. I just want you to remember that quote, for the duration. So the idea is that as long as the Soviet Union's there, we got to accept big government. We can't not accept big government, because we've got the Soviets, they're going to fucking take over the world. Now, one of the things that's interesting about all of these neocons is that underlining, a whole bunch of them were ex-communists, a whole bunch of neoconservatives. And even the neocons who weren't, like Buckley and George H.W. Bush, they seem to have this surprising confidence in the communist economic system. Like, they actually believed that this could take over the world. Not that communism was doomed to collapse, like Ludwig von Mises predicted in his great work, Socialism. That it was doomed to collapse from the beginning because it was an unworkable economic system. But these guys seem to think it was going to take over the world. But anyway, I just want to read that again. We have got to accept big government for the duration.
You know what Stalin's communism economic plan basically was? It was like, whatever you got to solve, just throw enough death at it.
Yeah.
I mean, like, hey, we don't have enough food. Just kill enough people to get enough food.
That's right.
We don't have enough people in that.
Go take it from them.
Just work them to death. We'll just kill enough of our people, and we'll get there.
Yeah, and
that
Stalin,
was the economic solution.
Yeah, they didn't have like all this fancy 21st century socialism where like the Federal Reserve just like throws a few digits in your bank account. They didn't have this like, oh, we've started this redistributive policy. So Stalin would literally just go from one farm and take their fucking grain and like fucking kill people along the way. But I just want to get this quote out one more time, okay? So and accept, because there's two parts to it. We have got to accept big government for the duration. For neither an offensive nor a defensive war can be waged except throughout the instrumentality of a totalitarian bureaucracy within our shores. So this is what's so infuriating about William F. Buckley. He's not like one of these leftists who's making the argument, the state is us, the state is the referee in the game, the state is just kind of there to help manage the excesses of capitalism. No. William F. Buckley is saying, and I quote, "We need a totalitarian bureaucracy within our shores." Of course, to avoid a totalitarian bureaucracy from outside of our shores. So just so you understand, this is the new right position. And Buckley, I will at least appreciate that he spells it out. Like, he doesn't mince words. He's like, this is what we stand for. Yes, libertarians, you guys are right in theory. The great issue is tyranny versus freedom. But yeah. Enough of that. We got the Soviet Union, so all bets are off. All that shit's done. We need totalitarianism here to beat the totalitarianism there. This is the new right that William F. Buckley represents, that probably nobody represented more than George H.W. Bush. Okay? So George H.W. Bush, as head of the CIA. Now, as most people who are head of the CIA, we don't really know their full legacy, because the CIA, kind of a secretive bunch. They don't really put all their plans out there publicly. They do a lot of shit in secret. And in fact, we don't even know, as I alluded to before, we don't even know exactly how long George H.W. Bush was in the CIA for. But, I've heard people people who are somewhat connected to the CIA say before that no one ever leaves the CIA. I've basically been like, so if you ever hear someone who was in the CIA, they're in the CIA. Like, that's like they're still on some level working for these deep state spies. And by that logic, I don't know if it's true or not, but by that, he was in the CIA as president, as a former president. I also have heard that George H.W. Bush, the presidents are allowed to get security briefings. And I've heard that he requested them more than any other president. Like, he'd still want to be in the loop even after he was out of the presidency. So one of the things that are known, like some things do come out and they're known. One of the things that we know that George H.W. Bush did as head of the CIA was that he helped create and really empower what was known as Team B. I don't know if you've heard of these guys before. So Team B was basically, you would have the CIA analysts who would get their was
that team bomb third world countries?
They were more focused. Not so far off. So you would have the CIA analysts, and they would come up with their intel on the Soviet Union. Yeah. And then they put together this other team, which is really, these were all the neocons. This is where the neocons really first started getting their foot in the door. And the Team B would always come up with these just crazy exaggerated reports about what the Soviet Union was really doing. And just about every single one of them turned out to be wrong throughout the years. But it'd always be like the Soviet Union has like, no, their military capability is way higher than we thought. And it would be like, you can go look this up and get lost. There's like a few documentaries on them. You could read a whole bunch about Team B in the CIA. It's really, really interesting stuff. But it would be like, they would have this stuff like, just for an example, they'd be like, the CIA would come up with reports on the Soviet Union anti-submarine capability, and they'd be like, well, our radar doesn't detect any anti-submarine capability in this area. And then Team B would say, the Soviets have developed radar-proof anti-submarine. So like the absence of evidence would become evidence that they had created something that was so sophisticated that they had all these plans about how the Soviet Union was about to take us over. And I'm talking, this is the 70s. Like they were predicting, and this is a few left-wing economists were too, that their GDP was growing wildly and that they were a much bigger economic force than anyone could have imagined and all this stuff. Meanwhile, they were dying. They were a collapsing nation. They were absolutely no threat to anybody. The only threat that they were was to their neighboring countries and the people they were starving within them. That was who they were a threat to.
So these people, they're just making the shit up?
Straight up making this shit up. This is just planting the seeds of war propaganda. Like, this shit didn't start with the CIA saying Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. This has been going on for a long fucking time. Literally just trying to get us involved in these conflicts. Now, What exactly was their goal through all this? I don't know. You could look at things in like a sinister way and be like, oh yeah, there were all these weapons companies that were making buttloads of fucking money as we started expanding the fucking military budget and selling weapons to the government. Maybe there's something a little bit more. I mean, I got to say, to this day, when part of it is definitely that these weapons companies make tons of money. There's definitely all sorts of incentives there to keep this thing going. But I also think it's like, look, man, this is the fucking empire. We're like the first empire ever that keeps it a secret that we're an empire. That's what's so unique about the United States of America modern day. And why do you think it is that basically you see all this stuff, this anti-Russia propaganda and anti-China propaganda to this day? It's like, what has Russia or China really done to us? What threat are they to us militarily? There's nothing. We can destroy everybody if we wanted to. I mean, okay, Russia's got some nukes, China's got some nukes, but really, we got a fuck ton more. And like, none of them are making any moves to nuke anybody anytime soon. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that they're the two huge, somewhat powerful countries that aren't under the empire. What's the problem with Iran in the Middle East? It's like, yeah, you're not with the empire, man. That's it. It's really no more or less than that. It's that we're an empire, and this is the way an empire works. We fucking take shit over, and then we run it. So anyway, Team B are the ones who are really pushing this fucking this Cold War hysteria. Okay, as head of the CIA, George H.W. Bush basically gave them like access to all the classified material and like gave them like these high level like kind of CIA whatever credentials or whatever. And this nonsense just kept going on, all this kind of Red Scare bullshit, which was, basically just working toward William F. Buckley's goal of creating the totalitarian bureaucracy within our shores to defeat the supposed threat of the Soviets. And of course, as all of this is going on over the decades, I mean, I don't know exactly what the number of people who are slaughtered all throughout these wars that we're fighting all over this communist threat. I mean, if you really want to add them all up, and I'm not saying George H.W. himself is responsible for all of them, but, like in Korea, in Vietnam, and in all of these different, those are the two biggest ones probably, but just hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of innocent people being slaughtered through all of this nonsense. As vice president to Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush was kind of stuck on that ticket by the establishment people who weren't a fan of Reagan, or at least were maybe in a similar situation to Trump, were a little bit concerned about some of the rhetoric he used. Because it was like, I don't know about this guy. He's really saying he's going to cut down on the size of government and all these other things. And, he wanted to like talk with Russia and he had all these things. And it's like, we better get George H.W. Bush there as his vice president. And that was kind of the deal that was made. Like these big donors would give him money, but we want the establishment guy there. Not so unsimilar to Donald Trump selecting Mike Pence as his vice president. Like, why exactly does it make sense that the most anti-establishment guy picks the most establishment person to be his vice president? And it's kind of like one of these things where it's like, okay, so this is how we'll have our guarantee that we've got at least our guy in line, should anything happen to you. Which, by the way, Ronald Reagan was shot at within the first 100 days of his presidency. I'm just saying. So anyway, George H.W. Bush as vice president was heavily involved in the CIA then, at the time, funneling drugs into America. This is something that is this is common knowledge. It's not disputed. This is a fact that we decided in Nicaragua now. It was in the vital interest of the United States of America that the communists not take over there. So we're going to back up the conquistas. And basically, they're a bunch of drug dealers. And so we need to get some money. The CIA needed to raise money and didn't have the official budget for it. So they fucking helped them. But there's a fucking Tom Cruise movie about this now. This isn't like a controversial thing. This is just real. They shipped drugs into the United States of America. They are responsible for the creation of crack cocaine. Okay? The untold amount of death and destruction that caused amongst the most vulnerable communities in our country. By the way, at the same time, Ronald Reagan is ramping up the war on drugs. These same cocksuckers are fucking shipping drugs into the country and arresting poor people and giving them these crazy sentences. Literally throwing human beings in cages for decades. There are people in jail today, still sitting in jail today. Families today who are still suffering through the fucking dysfunction. And like for all the fucking, the Republican people who like to look down at the black community and be kind of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's like, okay, there might be something to that point, but there's also something to the point that like there's some guy who's fucking literally grew up without a father because he was fucking thrown in jail for using the fucking drugs that the Bush and the Reagans fucking shipped into the country. So maybe there's that element of it too, So it's a little bit rich when there's some like Republican who's just lecturing somebody in these communities like, come on, get your act together. Vote Reagan, 84. Yeah. Anyway. All right. So there's some more of the great legacy of George H.W. Bush. Trafficking death into his own country while he supports the harshest drug laws that we had ever had in our country's time. Like the war on drugs started under Nixon, but it really started under Reagan. Like that's when they really ramped it up and really started going after people. And they started giving these like, the mandatory minimums and shit like that. So, you're caught with like fucking like literally like enough crack that can fit in the palm of your hand and you're doing 30 years in jail. Just insane evil shit. Like just I don't know. I don't even know what words to use to describe how fucking evil it is. And then George H.W. Bush becomes president. So Ronald Reagan did have, fairly good economic years. Not at the beginning, but after that, it was pretty decent. And we could, for all the shit that we won't, that they did that was terrible, they actually, which was the last time this ever happened and probably will ever happen in the United States of America, I know you know about this, is that Volcker actually, his Fed chairman, actually had the balls to swallow the medicine, steeply raise interest rates, kind of correct for the inflation of the 70s, and we ended up having a very prosperous expansion. So Ronald Reagan gets reelected. By 1988, it's George W. Bush runs against George H.W. Bush. And he had that ridiculous thing where he had that picture of him in the tank. And anyway, George H.W. Bush wins. He runs on being like a war hero or whatever, and he fucking wins. Ronald Reagan's guy, keep the Reagan Revolution going. So he wins. Now, what happens now under George H.W. Bush's watch is the most incredible thing that none of these fucking maniacs ever saw coming. So Team B, William F. Buckley, and George H.W. Bush never could have fucking imagined that this would happen, but they get their guy, George H.W. Bush, into the White House, and the Soviet Union collapses. It fucking collapses. Like all of a sudden it's not there anymore. None of these guys thought this was a possibility. We're building up a totalitarian bureaucracy to stop from these guys taking us over. Wait, what? They're gone. They don't exist anymore. They literally just collapsed. What Ludwig von Mises had predicted decades earlier came true. The whole thing was a fucking house of cards. It was bullshit. And these same left-wing economists who 10 years earlier were like, their GDP is doubling and tripling and everything's great and blah, blah, blah. And, they haven't had this, they used to say like, they haven't had the economic booms and busts that we've had. And you're like, but they had straight up famines. I mean, what would you call that? Like, is that not an economic hard time? It's like, but the whole thing is like, you don't eat, when you have no degree of a free market, you don't have any real indicators, so no one can tell. You know what I mean? Where it's just like, oh, well, what was unemployment in the Soviet Union? It's like, well, it was zero. Everyone had a government job. Like, what was the GDP rate? I don't know, like whatever they wanted it to be, like everything's just kind of like that. You can make the numbers look really good if the government's running everything, but it's all a house of cards, and one little, and it all flicked away. Now, in the process of this, by the way, I should go back and mention this because this is a really important one. So before we get to the stuff, it's unclear whether this started in 79 or 1980, but it was a plan that I believe started with Zbigniew Brzezinski under Carter, but it was continued under Reagan. Was the brilliant plan to help bring down the Soviet Union, right? And this plan was to, according to Brzezinski, the plan was to lure them into Afghanistan. Now, the official history is that they went into Afghanistan, but Zbigniew Brzezinski claims in his memoirs that this was their plan all along, to lure them into Afghanistan because, quote, they needed their own Vietnam. So we had seen what Vietnam did to America, like, oh shit, this cost us a ton of fucking money, a ton of our young, depleted the military. It destroyed our culture at home because we were bogged down in this war. So that's what the fucking Soviets need. They need their own fucking Vietnam, and we're going to give it to them in Afghanistan. Because, fuck Afghanistan. Who cares how many of those people got to die? I'm sure they won't hold a grudge against us for that. Oh, and by the way, to help defeat the Soviets in Afghanistan, we're going to arm and fund this really trustworthy group of young Islamists led by Osama bin fucking Laden, the Mujahideen in Afghanistan that turned into Al-Qaeda. We trained them. Our CIA, under Reagan, with George H.W. Bush, Mr. CIA, as the vice president, trained Osama bin Laden on how to lure a superpower into an unwinnable war to bring down their empire. This is the legacy of George H.W. Bush. Fuck that he said he wouldn't raise taxes and then raised them. This is what he did. So the idea, and it's like, hey, it was well worth it because it helped bring down the Soviets, right? Then, by the way, all these motherfuckers were celebrating this decision when the Soviet Union collapsed. They were like, see, we did it. We brought down the Soviet Union. And you wonder if there was a decent human being amongst them, how they felt when those planes were crashing into the towers in 9/11. Like, was there a single one of them who went, oh, shit. Oh, shit. Maybe that wasn't worth it at all. Maybe the Soviet Union was doomed to collapse anyway. And we just fucking built up this enemy. This serious fucking enemy. So all this happens as George H.W., which I just kind of personally believe had a lot to do with what the CIA was doing at the time and a lot to do with these foreign policy decisions that Ronald Reagan was making. So then under George H.W. Bush's watch, they collapse and poof, they're gone. And this to me, despite all the other shit, this is actually why George H.W. Bush is the worst. This is why he's so fucking despicable, because their excuse was taken away from them. This whole thing, Buckley, right? Let me go back and just read you the Buckley quote, just to make sure we're on the same page with Bill Buckley, because Bill Buckley knows that the great enemy of human beings is the state. And I'm with you, libertarians. We want to live in a free society. We want to get rid of the state. Yeah, of course. We have to be the anti-statists. However, we've got to accept big government for the duration. For the duration of the Soviet Union, we have to accept big government. Okay, well, guess what? They're gone. They're gone. Now, all you have to do is run the counterfactual of what any decent leader would have done in George H.W. Bush's position. It'd be like, we won. The Cold War's over. You have a huge celebration, a big parade, do your dumb political thing like we won the war. You pull all your troops back from everywhere. You slash the military budget. You abolish the CIA. You go, that's it, right? I mean, this was our whole thing. This is what we told all of you guys. We don't believe in this stuff. We don't believe in a big totalitarian bureaucracy. It's only that there's this totalitarian bureaucracy who's threatening us. Except what happens when you create a totalitarian bureaucracy? That shit's never going away. Nobody in that thing is ever going to go like, yep, solved it. I should be out of a job now. You know, we were making money hand over fist for the last couple decades, but there's really not a good need for us to do this anymore. So we go. So no, George H.W. Bush then decides to take it another way, and he embarks on the war in Iraq. This is less than 2 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. George W. Bush gets us right into the war in Iraq. And really, it was a year, if even that, because the real military action started around 1990. So the Soviet Union collapses. All of a sudden, the great threat that we talked about is gone. But it's like the old saying, like, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And when you're a hammer, you need a nail. So when you got this giant military, now all of a sudden you need to have an enemy. So now it was Saddam Hussein. Such a threat, right? Like, we're the good guys here. So we have to go. We went to go fight to reinstall the Emir of Kuwait. Like, it's not like even there's like, oh, we care about democracy or like good people. We fought on the side of a king against a dictator. By the way, Saddam Hussein, who was a horrible person. He did some really horrible things, particularly in 1980, if you back up a decade earlier. He did some really horrible things in 1980 to the Shiite population in his country and in Iran when the United States of America was supporting Saddam Hussein. So it was one more guy who we were supporting. We were giving him a bunch of weapons, even though he was gassing his own people at the time. This horrible guy. So we knew exactly how ruthless he was. And then, we decide now in 1990, we're going to go fight this war against Saddam Hussein, side with the king against the dictator. And George H.W. Bush was just praised by the military for his quick victory in Iraq, because basically he just tore through there. We didn't have a very big loss of life. Not too many Americans died in that war. Didn't cost us that much. Just got Saddam Hussein to surrender, left him in power, and they were like, that was amazing, man. Quick victory, easy war. This was like the Colin Powell doctrine of, you go in with overwhelming force, it's quick, nothing prolonged, and everybody was celebrating George H.W. Bush for this war in Iraq. However, as history tends to judge these things, now in Iraq, hundreds of thousands of people dead later, trillions of dollars spent later, an entire nation destroyed, and a conflict that we're still bogged down in to this day. Doesn't seem like such a great move. So there, to me, is the George H.W. Bush legacy. It's one of fucking lies, corruption, war, drug trafficking, and to me, the most important one is that he was the guy who decided that even without the Soviet excuse, we would still continue to be the policemen of the world. We would still go out and search for a war to find. And particularly that we would start reshaping the Middle East after the Soviet Union collapsed. And man, hasn't that worked out well. So there's that's George H.W. Bush. He is a person who, if he lived in any type of just society, would have been strung up on war crimes a long time ago. And this is the guy who you turn on the news, and this is the crazy thing, right? Of the entire political spectrum, there's Fox News all the way over here and MSNBC all the way over here, but what all of them agree on is that this guy is a great human being. This guy is someone we need to praise. We may have had a policy dispute with him here or there, but he was a real good dude. And you got to hear stories about how loving a dad he was or something like that. It's like, oh, okay. This is why, by the way, and this is why I think people don't understand, because Murray Rothbard said he would vote for Bill Clinton in 1992. And people will be like, how the fuck could Rothbard vote for, a big government liberal or something like that? And it's like, because that's how evil George H.W. Bush was. That's all it was about. And it's like, that is the legacy of George H.W. Bush. He was a monster. A monster. I hope he's looking up at me right now as I record this podcast. And that's the guy they're praising. Isn't that just insane? It's just an insane world that we live in. I don't know. George H.W. Bush. Good dude. There's always sit there and hear these things on the news. It's like George W. Bush is like, I called my daddy and I thanked him for being such a great daddy. and thanks for loving me so much. And you're just sitting there like, what world am I living in? Like, what is going on in this reality? It's just this sick fucking, and it really is like, it's all the disease of statism. Like you just, when it's done by the state, we don't look at these things for what they are, you know? Like if there was a private company or just some guy who had done a fraction of this, you know, like a fraction of this, which again, like if it was a private organization, the only name I could think of to call this would be the mafia, right? Like if you had a private organization that was like, oh, well, we started this big mass murder campaign, we sold drugs, we'd go around and fucking collect money forcibly from people, like all these things, you just, and can you imagine if like, you know, like a fucking mob don dies and everyone's just like saying these nice things about him. And you're like, yeah, but he was a fucking murderer. And you're like, well, you know, you might disagree with some of the calls he made when he was running that organization, but you can't, you know, and then it's just, everybody's praising him. And it's just like, and I've said before on the show, I actually have more respect for the mob don because at least they were what they were. At least they were like, yeah, dude, I'm a fucking gangster. Like, that's what I do. I would have more respect and less hostility toward the state if they just came out and were like, yeah, dude, we're fucking gangsters. You're our tax cattle. Like, that's what you're here for. You're literally our cannon fodder and our tax fodder, our tax cattle. That's what you do. Like, you're here so I can come take your money or send you to go fucking die if need be. And then you'd almost go like, all right, well, that's who they are. Then I'd be out of a job. I'd just be like, well, see, they tell you that's who they are. But instead they go off with this thing of like, you know, like it's in the vital national security interest of our country that Saddam Hussein doesn't take over Kuwait. Who the fuck cares about that? You know, the counterfactual that Scott Horton loves to talk about, and me and Scott Horton have had like long phone conversations about this, but is that because Ron Paul ran for president in 1988. So Ron Paul, who really is just the greatest human being ever. Ron Paul was one of the first, I believe there were 3 congressmen who endorsed Ronald Reagan in 1979. And Ron Paul was one of them. Because if you remember, Ronald Reagan was talking like a good libertarian game. Like Ronald Reagan, got his inaugural address in 1980, he said, his speech, he said, government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem. And that was like, you know, like that's what Ron Paul would say if he got elected, you know, and he was running on this idea, you know, like capitalism is the answer. Freedom is the answer. Government intervention isn't helping anything. So Ron Paul supported him. And Ron Paul, after his first budget came out, later in the first year of his presidency, Ron Paul bailed on him and was like, nah, fuck this guy. I'm out of this. So he wouldn't support him. Then he was just disgusted at his foreign policy, at his budgets, at all this other stuff. And in 1988, Ron Paul ran on the Libertarian Party ticket. And back then it was like, you know, pre-internet days. There was really no way to get your message out. And all the rules are completely written against third parties. And it's very, very hard for third parties to compete in the American system. It's harder now than it was back then. But anyway, so Ron Paul ran in 1988, and the counterfactual that Scott Horton and me would always talk about was Ron Paul wins in 1988, and the Soviet Union collapses on his watch, and Ron Paul gets to preside over the dissolution of the military-industrial complex, and just how perfect it all would have lined up. Because once that happened, any good leader could have just been like, well, you know, just like all you guys said, just like we told you, this is why we have this whole military-industrial complex, and now the Soviet Union's gone. And there's no one else who's a threat to do anything to America. That's it. We're done. We're out of this game. We're not going around the world looking for wars to fight anymore. It would have been so easy. The country was still reeling from the wars in the past, even though it was decades later. The Vietnam syndrome lasted a long time. You know, Vietnam syndrome, by the way, that's their word. That's like what they call it. So Vietnam syndrome was the problem that the American people had this fucking syndrome where after fighting in this pointless war and sending their brothers and sons to go die or kill other people, they were like, yeah, we don't really want to do this anymore. It's like, we got to come up with something for this Vietnam syndrome. And the answer was the war in Iraq. And all of the fucking people. So, you know, George H.W. Bush is directly, largely responsible for the drug crisis in America, for the death and destruction in inner cities. He's responsible for 9/11. He's responsible for the war in Iraq. I mean, not like indirectly in some little kind of quasi way, like directly one of the main players who's implicated in all this shit. So when people are like, when I said at the beginning, where I was like, oh, what should your obituary be if Adolf Hitler dies or Joseph Stalin dies or Pol Pot or Castro or one of these guys? I'm not like, I mean what I say. I'm not being hyperbolic. That's the obituary that George H.W. Bush deserves. Fuck that guy, fuck his family, and fuck all these goddamn, like these pathetic news organizations that do nothing but lick his boots. What's the point of you? Why do you exist if all you do is lick the boots of the power? Well, I thought the whole point of having a press was to shine a light on the darkness and blah, 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 hold power, to speak truth to power and hold them accountable. Okay, well, CIA head, President of the United States. What's more powerful than that? What's more powerful than that? How could you just know all the things? By the way, nothing that I said on this podcast is at all in dispute, except the stuff that I said was in dispute. Like maybe he worked for the CIA longer than when he was just the head. Maybe that's in dispute. But all the other shit is just fact. Just look it up. All this shit is out there. So all these fucking journalists, they either don't know this shit, you're so goddamn incompetent that you can't figure out as much as a dummy comedian like me. You can't fucking know what I know that I figured out from the fucking internet, that I have right here on my phone, all the information. You can't be bothered to do that work, or you know what's going on and you are fucking evil. Those are the two options. You guys pick. I think it's a little bit of each, to be honest. All right. We're going to wrap there. That's our show for today. The legacy of George H.W. Bush. We'll be back on Monday, or excuse me, on Friday with a brand new episode. I love you all. See you at the Soho Forum. Peace. All right, guys, thanks for listening to the show. Of course, there are a bunch of amazing shows here at gasdigitalnetwork.com. The one we're going to be highlighting today is one of my favorites, High Society Radio. I love all three of these guys. This was one of the first shows that we added to Gas Digital, and I was super excited when they came over because Bronx Johnny and both the Chris's are just goddamn hilarious. They're so great together. If you're a fan of Legion of Skanks, you're going to love High Society Radio. So check out a quick clip from them and check out all the great shows here at gasdigitalnetwork.com.
Hey, look, so first... You got numbers? I hit this fucking 970.
Yeah.
So I'm letting everyone know. By the Tuesday this comes out, you guys will never see me again.
I respect
guarantee that. Okay. That or I buy Gas Digital, and I just,
you and Gronk.
Yeah, me and Gronk. I like have enough money to like actually bring Gronk in as a partner.
At that point, you got more money than he does. What do you need him for?
I just want him, Johnny. Okay, I'll be so rich.
Well, who else are you gonna get with a G so it could be Blank and Stanley Media?
I don't know. Where are some fucking celebrities with G in their name?
Gregory
Triple
Hines?
G?
Okay, yeah.
Oh,
all right.
yeah, that's mad
That's
G's.
perfect. I will get me and Triple Gas. It's
You fucking asshole.
It's mostly Kazaki fucking content.
It's just him giving you recipes for Russian black bread, eating
you know
some
what?
sort of smoked herring.
You know what?
yeah.
I'm gonna make them and I'm gonna eat them, and then we're gonna do a podcast about
Just
it.
smoking cigarettes on there. That's a fucking life.
It'll be me,
Caprice.
Triple G, Dice, Bo Dito. We'll make a super show.
Fuck, Bo Dita's the man. Miss you, Bo.
Hey, it's fucking.
Hey, it's four guys who can't talk that good doing a podcast.
Hey, it's we're over here now.
Oh, man.
We're over, right, Dice? Hey, what about you, Triple G? Oh, you fucking can barely speak English, but you speak more than fucking Canelo. You were robbed, Triple G.
Oh.
This will be most shows. Then Bo Dito, hey, you're a fucking crooked cop, but I love you.
He's good at what he does. Oh, man. That's the worst.
Gas Digital is going to be fucking amazing. And I'll be like, hey, that's not
It's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be good. And I'm like, hey, it's not a fucking stutter.
shit.
Look, Triple G and Chris Stanley S own the fucking thing, all right? So
Nice.
stop making fun of us for stuttering. Now, Triple G, I want you to fuck this guy up for making fun of me.
Oh, yeah.
Don't worry. I'll fucking cover the goddamn...
Oh, gee, this guy's making fun of your stutter.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Triple G, all right? My wife. Like I'll fucking yell that. Yeah, that's gonna replace the Real Ass Podcast. My wife in the morning.
Hell yeah. That's
Yeah.
great.
It'll be me, Triple G, Zach Amico and Mike Feeney. All right, it'll be it's 4 hosts on every fucking show. From
God,
now on.
that's a lot.
If I swear to God, if I see one fucking show on Gas Digital, I fucking will. They'll be shit canned. All right. Look. All right. So right now we have we're over here now. Right.
All right, that's a good block.
And then what's the other fucking show? My wife.
There you go.
So that's 2 shows. All right. Bruce Buffer's in a fucking world of shit because he's just one dude. I hope he gets it with Josta and fucking Tim Dillon and Ray Kump.
There you go. That's 4.
And then you know what?
Been here for over a year.
Nope. It's fucking. That's their new show. I don't know what to call it yet, but we're gonna.
Time.
Okay. All right. Yeah. There you go. So listen, that's where we're at with this fucking. Right. Once I win this $900 million, and Harrington, guess what? You're gonna be the president of the fucking world. There you go. The world being
Kingmaker.
2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, South Carolina. What's up? All right, that's my business plan for fucking winning the lottery.